Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I am David Pendergrass, and I have today the world's most beautiful co-host. And my wife showed up too. And I'm so glad that they're both here today. I'm so glad. My wife, Elaine, who is a children's ministry consultant extraordinaire. I've had on the podcast a few times before. We chat about stuff in the church because it's interesting because we're both, well, I guess this is both of our fields. Both of our field?
This is our field.
Yeah, good. And we're reflecting on the way that the coronavirus has affected the church, and more particularly shutting down the church's usual way of doing things has affected the church. And we were reflecting on that, and Elaine said, we have to do a podcast on that. So,
one of my questions, I've written down some notes because we've talked about things, and one of the things we talked about was the idea that when you ask people, are you a Christian? Just in general, in life, normally, they say, oh yeah, and they say, yeah, well, I go to church. And so one of the things we talked about was, how does that change? Because now people are not going to church, to the physical church building. And I would venture to say that most people who typically claim that they were Christians because they went to the church building are probably not doing the online thing. They might be flipping through and seeing a service for a few minutes and then going on. But that is something just to rethink.
Yeah, and as we've talked, I'll stop saying as we've said over and over because that will sound annoying to the people in podcast land. But my first concern when churches started shutting down or ceasing their meeting was what would happen in individual discipleship. Mm-hmm. Really, I'm curious, since everyone makes up, as a pastor, I mean, it's like in Elaine too, we've heard it all of why a person would stop going to church. I mean, it's amazing. Sniffles, people my kid has something at 4 p.m., but the service starts at 10 a.m. Or we have school tomorrow. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons to say no. For most people, quite frankly, the people, a little more diehards will come no matter what. But if you take away that meeting, I was always curious about, and I'm not saying that it's to slam people, but I'm curious about people whose discipleship is barely hanging on. If they cannot meet anymore, if you don't have that kind of external accountability, do they have any kind of spiritual disciplines? And that's something to ask yourself, perhaps, and all of us, is what's our prayer life like? Reading our Bible, studying, praising, serving people, the typical things Christians associate with spiritual disciplines. Have they stopped, stayed the same, or gone up? And I think it'd be interesting to do a poll at churches once it goes back to see what happened. And again, not in shame, but to say, I have a suspicion it stayed the same or went way down for most people. Mm-hmm. And some people, I'm sure, it went up some because they got a little more anxious and whatever. But the point is, let's do something about that. That your discipleship cannot be predicated upon whether or not we meet together. Though it is enhanced by it, it can't be predicated upon that.
It's something that we talk about a lot with people and with parents about how they need to raise their children in faith, and they depend on the church to do that. Because I think a lot of times they just don't know what to do at home. But it's another situation of, how do we do this? What do we do? And then, so you and I talked about a lot of people probably, and we've done it too, on Sunday, you get up and put your clothes on, go to church, and go through the motions, whether or not you're typically involved or talking or praying or worshiping or whatever really in spirit, but are you just doing it to go through the motions? Mm-hmm. And then leave, and you feel good because you accomplished that. And we talked about how there are some people when we go to the gym, when our gym was open, we would go and you see the people who are really serious about working out, who do their workout and they look sweaty and whatever. And then you see the other people who just wander the gym, mm-hmm. who seem to not even look like they've done anything. And they, not that I pay attention to that, but they they look at people and they watch and then they're done. And it may feel good because I went to the gym, whether or not they did it. And so it's really moving from that former understanding of, oh, I went to church, I did my due diligence, or I went to the gym, okay, I've accomplished that, to what does it mean? How has it affected me? That whole discipleship piece.
And I thought about it until you were just saying that, is that the people, I bet the demographic that has hurt the most from the church being shut down is children. Because noticed in my experience, most Christian parents are not discipling their children.
Right. And what I've seen as working with a lot of children's pastors and things like that, what I've seen is the children's pastors in general, if you go on blogs, if you go on Facebook, whatever, a lot of them are trying very hard to provide resources for parents, and they feel like the parents aren't really using the resources. And the excuse is, oh, we're doing so much. There's homeschooling. We're having to do so much on Zoom with our kids and get their homework done and do normal life and keep our work, whatever. And so, yeah, that's kind of put on the back burner. So if that's the case, I don't feel like it's for the lack of trying in a lot of cases. I think it's for the lack of, parents are looking at it as one more thing to do.
Well, I mean, that's the point, though. Parents trying. In other words, parents are not trying. And this will sound fussy. I know this because it's the same thing. Look, we're parents. I mean, we're parents of 2 teenagers. We're going to stop and pray for that right now because it is amazing how things have changed. But the fact is, they are not actively busy doing things for 15 hours of consciousness every day. They're not. No, they're not. And I disagree, though, when parents say, they're just so busy in all these Zoom calls. No, they're not. Catalog their day. Really, just go through the limit minute by minute or do by quarter or hour and see how many minutes they spend on video games or TV or playing with a dog or cat or whatever. And, of course, they need to have times where they enjoy things just as adults do. But it's just a silly idea. The fact that as if they're too busy to read their Bible, just like adults. I mean, it's the same nonsense. It's just the same.
It's as parents, we have to keep our children accountable, just like we should have people keeping us accountable. You know, even have you brushed your teeth today?
Right.
I mean, have you changed your clothes? When's the last time you took a shower? We're doing that with teenagers. But at the same thing with little kids. I was on with somebody yesterday on a Zoom call, and I admired the little girl's dress, and the mom said, "Oh, how many days have you been wearing that? Oh, is it 3 days now?"
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those, it's happening, and that's okay. And at the same point, we've got to make sure that our children and that we are setting that example of still doing our discipleship things.
And I suspect there are at least 2 major reasons why that's the case. And I bet the number one reason is because parents themselves don't want to deal with the anxiety of holding their children accountable.
Sure.
That is, it's a responsibility they have to stay on top of them, and they don't want it. And so it's an easy out to say, well, they're already so busy. In other words, I think they're lying. The parents are being disingenuous when they say that. The other thing is there are genuine anxieties that children have about having responsibility. So I've got to get these grades and I got to get this and that, particularly children who are not accustomed to having to be self-directed. And they don't have the boundaries or structures. You have parents who don't have boundaries or structures, and the children don't. And it creates a lot of anxiety of, I can't get it all done and I've got all this work. And that's legitimate. Then parents ideally should help. The children need parents who help them deal with anxiety and process it and talk it through and breathe it through and pray it through. And then if the parents can't, then you seek out a counselor online or via phone call to see it. My child needs help with anxiety, feeling overwhelmed. We know that they do have enough time, but they're feeling an inordinate amount of anxiety. Well, if that's the case, all these things have solutions. But the chief problem can't be laziness. That's immoral. Children having anxiety is not immoral. But if parents are just lazy, it's immoral. And that's something we've got to encourage other parents to say, we can do better about this. We've got to have conversations about Jesus. We've got to have conversations about what's going on as far as discipleship goes. We have to. We can't rest on the children's pastor, youth pastor anymore, because what if I can reach all? That's my point. They're the ones who are affected, it seems to me.
And likely this will continue for some time, because even when churches do resume whatever normal will look like, being back in the church building and things like that, there's a lot of talk about how children's ministry will likely be one of the last things to come. Because think about this. You can't keep 3-year-olds 6 feet apart from each other. There's going to be coughing and snot and babies chewing on toys. I mean, there's a lot of bodily fluids and things, and it's just not going to happen for a while. So it is to the point where parents can not only depend, they shouldn't, but parents can not only depend on the church for those resources. At the same time, parents, please know that there are resources for you. There are plenty of things that you can find online. Go to Pinterest, go to my website, ElainePendergrass.com, teaching kids about God. If you attend a church, look and see if there's something that's an email from your children's pastor or anything like that. There are lots of children's pastors are doing read-alouds. They're doing devotions. They're doing Zoom meetings with their kids. They're doing videos. There are lots of things you can find. Go to YouTube. You can find plenty. I have a lot of videos that are on my website as well about how parents can do real life activities with their children and talk about faith issues. So there are options, and don't give up on that, because it's gonna continue for some time. So find those resources and ask for help. Another thing, I reached out this week on Facebook. Normally people would respond about lots of things. If I said, "What's your favorite food?" I asked parents, "What do you need right now? What are your struggles?" And I got one person who sent me a prayer request about something. I was shocked. But I kind of wasn't shocked, because people don't want to admit that they're having struggles with their children or as parents. They want to complain about it a little bit and say, I had an extra glass of wine or whatever, to cope. But really, this is the time to really think about what are your struggles? What do you need? Do you need someone? I wrote a blog about this just a few days ago. Do you need someone to play a game with your child or interact with them online for 15 minutes so that you can take a bath and just be away from your child for a little bit? Do you need someone to help you teach your child math? Is there a concept that you're struggling with that you would, there's someone else you could depend on to help with that? Do you need whatever it is? Just think about that a little bit and then find people to help. I've seen lots of teachers that have said, hey, if you need help, reach out. They mean it. And I've seen lots of children's ministers and they want to help you, but you need to know what to ask for so that they can help you.
Yeah, that's, of course, great stuff. That reminds me of a general pattern amongst a lot of parents that I've known, and that's not always spoken, is the general feelings of guilt and, of course, worse than that, shame of not being able to do the things I think parents ought to do. This is particularly prevalent amongst mothers, that I'm not good enough. And so why would I reach out to parents or to you, Elaine, or David, or whomever, because I don't need to help, or rather, it usually goes like this: I should be able to. Mm-hmm. I should be able to do X, Y, Z.
As if it magically appears. You get these skill sets when you become a parent.
They're my child. I should be able to do all these things. And some parents, of course, really do think they can do all those things without the training. They're a world-class educator. That's why I can homeschool all my kids, because I don't need to learn pedagogy or go to school for it.
I know my kid.
I know my child. I know they like this color or that kind of crayon or Kool-Aid or whatever it is. And that's, you can, my point is, some people have the mindset, as you know, but most, in my experience, don't. Most people have feelings of inadequacy. And of course, it can be acute when it comes to things like discipleship or talking about sex or talking about all kinds of issues. And it's okay to feel inadequate. Mm-hmm. And I just want to buttress and concur with what Elena's saying. That is, it's okay to feel inadequate. There's help. It's okay. And it's a big step for a parent to finally say, maybe I do need some help maybe I should consult their teacher on how to do this mathematics. Maybe I should consult a pastor, a therapist, or someone to help them deal with anxiety. Maybe I need some help. You know what? There are books. And the library's free. If it's closed, you can go online. There's all kinds of resources out there. Yeah. It's okay to get help. It's just okay to get help. I seek help all the time when I need help. I've read countless books on subjects to learn how to do it better by specialists. And it's not born. When my children were born, we didn't come with a manual. I didn't gain all these supernatural skill sets. They had to be learned and acquired. And so the same thing, if you're a parent out there, you don't have to drink extra wine. That's not a skill set. Drinking wine is not a skill set.
It's a coping mechanism.
It is a coping mechanism. It's self-medicinal and leads to addiction.
And there's the whole thing that came out years ago. It's an ancient proverb, I believe, but it takes a village to raise a child. And that's not a secular idea. In the church, when children are baptized into the church, if you come from that sort of faith that baptizes infants, or if they're dedicated, in general, the church, the people that are there, agree and promise to help raise a child in faith. And so this is the time to actually do it. Find people that are gifted at certain things and ask them to help you. That's okay.
Well, some things we've talked about are going to change as we go forward, at least probably for several months, if not forever. Things like the service, if you have to have 6 feet apart and so forth. What I was thinking, I can see churches, if they're wise, is they're going to simply have to offer more service times. That is, if you have a maximum occupancy of, say, 300 people in your church building, and you knock it down to 100, 150 people, maybe even 100, you're going to have to have more services. And you have to tell people that. And one idea to tell them is, you tell them we're having services, but I'm saying one way is, instead of saying first come, first served, is you could simply go over the attendance list and say we're breaking up by alphabet list. So your last name's A through G. You can meet at the 9 o'clock service, the blah blah is the dinner service, the blah blah, and then that leaves room. Say there's 20 extra people per service if they didn't pay attention, or if they're visiting the church or whatever. Then we could mark that off. That's one idea, and also could be during the week. It doesn't have to be on a Sunday. It doesn't have to be on a Sunday morning. It could be any time to say we're offering services throughout the week or three. The problem with that, of course, is it becomes a huge logistic nightmare. If you don't know this in the background, it becomes a nightmare when it comes to all the people who have to be there. So if the worship team and praise band, it's a lot of commitment from a lot of people. But my response to that is, you could always have a couple, and this is fairly common in multi-site churches. Have done this for a long time. You can have parts of it recorded so that the sermon itself is played. Yeah. Or you have the worship set that's played and the pastor's live. You can invert it. The point is, it doesn't have to be live for 6 services. It doesn't have to be.
And one thing to think about is people doing, we were just talking about this in our small group this morning, but people have been doing small groups and things over Zoom or over Google Meet or something like that. And so they're finding some health there. They're finding the ability to connect with people, not even physically having to be there. I know some people have told me that they've seen people who haven't even normally attended regular church, normal church in the building, who are coming that way. And so the idea of experimenting with that, thinking about that, can that still be something that's offered? Because think about it, you could connect with people across different places, not necessarily even in your community. You could invite your non-Christian friends who it's not as scary maybe to go into a church building and not know how to dress or what to say, but you could join via Zoom or something like that. So that's something to think about. One thing we've talked about is everything doesn't have to be how it was. It doesn't have, and it's not going to be how it was. But thinking about keeping those things and incorporating technology into whether it's through small group time or to the service. A lot of people are attending services, maybe they're flipping through and they watch for a few minutes or whatever, but you're able to have some choice too. That's another thing we've talked about is, and we can go into that in just a minute. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say a few things, and I agree. And one of the great benefits of this, one of the great benefits, in my opinion, of this whole situation is going to be that when you have people have a very difficult time with change, this will force them to change. So when you go back to the way it used to be and you say, well, we can't do that anymore. We have to change the service time, or we have to add this, or we have to have online, or we have to have this digital.
Or even that table has always been in that place.
Always
we can't
been there.
Move that table.
We got to have the change because that table makes people
people
congregate there. We have to move it. So if there's a reason above, well, just because the pastor wants to do it that way, or because the children's pastor is always trying to change something becomes greater than them, and it forces, in many ways, I'm sure, necessary changes. And there are older, this is not true for younger churches, it's not true for most contemporary non-denom churches, it's not, because they start the church, it's all online already. But for older churches, this is going to be a massive paradigm shift. But I'm saying is it will force them to the 21st century, if not at least 1980s, 90s, and they have to all of a sudden, I won't tell you, but I know someone just the other day asked their pastor, so we have a website? And they've had a website for years, but this gentleman is in the 80s. But the point is, they don't even know what the concept is, and they shouldn't be in charge of the online ministry. The point is, it's an easy argument to make now, or a point to make when they're forced to make it. I think it's going to help a lot of people kind of get over things. Another thing that's surprising to me is how much people don't know how much seeing physical representations of people they know, the familiarity, it causes chemicals in the brain to respond. And they're good. They're dopamine, serotonin. It feels good to see a person you know, especially if you love the person and it's dear friends. I've said this to my wife many times as we've been through a real dark season this last, 5 years of our life. I'm kidding. is that as much as possible, you can video chat your friends. You can't be near the person, but if you can video chat the friends, then it helps a whole lot. But just seeing them on video, just seeing them. You don't have to see them in person, just seeing the person. So the point is, of course, it's very important. So in church life, instead of vitiating or devaluing the role of having online, well, it's not the same. Of course, it's not the same. But it is very close to being the same because your body physiologically responds in a very similar way as seeing the person. You can't shake them, shake the person, literally shake their hand, hug them. Of course not. It's not identical, but it is very, very beneficial. And so I'm hoping that those have a difficult time embracing the fact that electronic medium can be very powerful, that they'll see it did help me a lot personally. Now I'm much more open to going online. And I hope pastors and leaders of any sort start championing that a lot more to say we should not vitiate the fact to be online. I've wanted this for a long time. I don't know how long it would hold on to, but I think going forward it's going to be helpful, which is no reason why various teachers of the churches shouldn't be hosting live Facebook studies during lunch breaks or whatever time, just any time, instead of saying, no, they have got to come to the church building, got to turn on the lights, turn on the air conditioner or the heater. People got to drive here to sit in person. No, they do not have to. No, they don't have to. Right. I think there's some skin in the game, and I get all this stuff, but no, they don't. You can save a lot of money if the building by not doing that. The other thing I was going to say very quickly is about the Zoom meetings and seeing people in person. I think there is a tremendous psychological benefit, and I would dare say it has theological implications. There's a tremendous benefit for doing that beyond just feelings of dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and so forth. And that is and I could talk for a long time. I've talked about this in other podcasts and my sermons and on, and that is what we call in transactional analysis. He does. Okay. There's a lot of different theories. There's the two different major kinds of visions of the self that psychologists talk about. There's the ideal self, which is the false sense of self. It's the you put forward to people when you're on your best behavior. It's you on your first date. It's you on your job interview. It's you wear your best. You brush your teeth. And you sit up straight, stand up straight. Say yes. Your manners are great. You're trying to impress so badly. You're trying so badly to get the other person to like you, whether it's that date or the employer. That's the ideal self, which is the false self. It is not who you are. It is you deliberately putting out a false sense of how good you are and how attractive you are. But it's not true. Aspects of it are you, but in general, it's a false sense of self. Then there's the true self, the genuine self, the real self. And that's the part of you that's both good and bad, and on it goes. It's that part, the real self in therapy, that we try so desperately to get the person who is in the client, so to get to the place where they can start accepting that the ideal or false self is a false self. For a lot of people, they can't even grasp the two differences because it takes a while to get some people. And then when they do grasp the differences, there's a large portion, certainly in America, who think that you must be the ideal self or the false self in order to be loved, in order to be cared for, in order to get attention, in order to bond with people. And they won't say it that way because most people are not articulate with their motivations or their feelings at all. They're not. But as therapists, we articulate for them and say, is it like this? They'll go, yes, exactly what it is. And that is people believe that you have to be the ideal false self in order to keep the friendship. And that's why it's particularly true amongst feeler types, which tend to be and Myers-Briggs tends to be females. It's not exclusively. It is not exclusively. It tends to be amongst females. The sense of, if I am not what I think is the best version of a girl or the person in this role or a mother or a daughter or a friend or whatever, I will lose the friendship. And the fear of losing the friendship and that connection or being liked is greater than the fear of losing who I really am. And so you'll see this in movies and in books and on and on. Don't lose who you are. Don't lose yourself in that relationship with that boy. The reason why that's such a common trope in narratives and in movies and songs is because it does occur. They do lose themselves. They don't have a self. They have a false self, an ideal self. Well, Christians do the same thing. As I've said in many other podcasts and so forth, this is a very, very common, prevalent pattern amongst churchgoers. And churchgoers, Christians are not Christians. That's why I'm using the word churchgoers. People go to church. They tend to think that to go to church means I've got to stay in my ideal self. From the second I hit the parking lot till I leave, I'm in the ideal self.
Starting from wear the right thing.
Yeah, I've got to wear the right thing. I've got to say the right. Hi, Bob. How's it going? Doing well. Doing the weather great.
Smile,
okay.
shake
I've got to
hands.
smile. It's your best self. You might be walking back to the car, yelling at your kids, cussing, talking about all the stuff you hate, gossiping, saying a bunch of hateful things, but no one can hear you in the moment besides your family. And what happens for most of the time, most families are real around themselves. And you'll find those people that you like a lot more in life. And Elaine's talked about this often, but there's people who say, I just like so-and-so. I feel like I can be like myself around the person. Mm-hmm. That is not the other person's doing. It's your feeling that you feel safe. Mm-hmm. And another way of saying it in modern parlance is, I don't feel judged. And what another way to use a therapist term is, you feel like you don't have to be your ideal self. Mm-hmm. And that feels freeing. It feels liberating, safe. You feel loved. It feels awesome because you feel like someone's loving you, good, not to pretend you. With that, the good, bad, and ugly. That's exactly mm-hmm. right. Many, many people in life never get to that point. Mm-hmm. They don't feel loved for who they really are. And so when someone says God loves you, it's very, very difficult for them to ever feel that. Now, I can go on for a long time about that. I won't. My point, but I had this little psychology background because I'm back to my point, which is not only does it make you feel good to see people you know and love, the second thing is, I think one of the great benefits of Zoom, conferencing, electronic, and all this stuff, psychologically and even theologically, is that these kind of conferences make it very difficult to be your ideal self. Mm-hmm. And you see this across the board, whether it be on TV or wherever it might be. People look more normal. They act more normal.
They tell you they're in their PJs, like for girls. I'm not wearing it. I haven't done my hair in a week. That
and
kind of
and girls especially, because mm-hmm. they're so typically very insecure because they're so accustomed to being their false self. what they do is, this is very common with people who have low self-esteem. They announce their imperfections in the hopes that if I announce it, you will validate me and let me know that I'm not ugly, I'm not less valuable, and then it decreases my anxiety. It's like saying I point out the pimple on my face first before you notice it, so that I notice it. And then when you go, oh, it doesn't matter, I feel good. I feel good about myself. That's all low self-esteem, bad boundaries, is all unhealthy, but so many people do it. Unfortunately, of course, that demonstrates that. But on the bright side, it demonstrates it's so hard to be. You can be all prettied up. Most people are not. Their rooms look messy. The lighting's not perfect. There's a big echo, whatever it might be. And I think that is powerfully good. I think in general that is good. And I think
you get to know people with their surroundings.
That's exactly right. So if you have prayer meetings or Bible studies and people are more disarmed because they're not in the normal situation with a three-piece suit on and whatever it is, and the lights are turned on, I think that's very good. And so I really hope that post-apocalyptic return from death and whatever that the Americans will go through, I hope it does not. I hope this electronic stuff stays on. And secondly, I hope leaders and pastors talk about what I just did, which they probably won't at all, but I wish they would. And I wish it were in Foster to say, you know how you felt more normal and you goofed off and you're whatever? That's the way it should be. Now, the problem with that is people's true colors come out. And you're going to be a little meaner, a little curter, a little whatever. And then guess what? Now we're being Christians. Now, how do I build them up? How do I love them? How do I forgive them? Yep. How can I be in a bad mood and still go to church? How can I not be on my best behavior and still be loved? And
what if you're in a crying mood that
that's
day?
Right.
And
that's right.
I've been in a group of girls that I work with that are
right.
in all over the nation. And somebody started a group for Marco Polo. We've all been Marco Poloing each other every day. And we're all Christians. And some days people are in tears because of whatever's going on in the situation. Other days we're laughing and making fun of whatever it was that we did or what recipes we've done. And it's a mix. But you do learn people's true colors. And, for people that tend to be judgy, like I used to be more judgy than I am now, when certain things come out that are the real self, you have to go, well, wait a second, that's different. But at the same time, it's like, I'm so glad that she's her real self. I'm so glad that I can be my real self. I'm learning to be more like that. And then we can help each other together and be accountable to each other and pray for each other and support each other. And that whole piece that I was saying about asking for help, it's happening. Another thing that we mentioned, the opportunity for that live interaction too, and via technology, and you alluded to this a little bit ago, is being able to do it during different times of day. Just the reality is when everybody can't make Sunday morning at such and such a time, or that might not be their best time to meet, as far as small groups and things. A lot of churches, mega churches that are having successful small group meetings are doing it in homes or restaurants or things like that in normal times, live, together in someone's home. And that works better for them to do it on a Tuesday night, and maybe the church offers childcare for their kids or whatever. But as you mentioned before, having something like a pastor's study during lunchtime, everybody takes lunch at some point. And even if it's live, you could find out what works for the group and do a 30-minute time together. Some groups might want to meet after bedtime for their kids. Put your kids down. If it's young parents of young children, 8:00 might be the best time for them to meet, or 8:30 or something. So there are options for that we don't typically do at the church building. Why would we ever offer childcare starting at 8:30 in the evening? Well, you don't have to. You don't even have to get dressed. Put your kids to bed and let's do it. So those options are available that I think, hopefully, I hope that they will continue, because I think they can really meet needs of people that aren't there. Also, in our small group just a little bit ago, David and I talked about this last week, but there's some churches do prayer groups and they do them very early in the morning, like 7 a.m. And I don't know about you, but some of us are not great morning people. Plus we have kids to get out the door. If you have children, this is not feasible for you to get up, get your children ready, go to a prayer service, where are your kids going to be? It just doesn't work unless you're an older person or have older children or whatever. But you might want to be involved in a prayer group. Well, why can't that prayer group be on Zoom? Why does it have to be in person or Zoom, whatever it is you use, FaceTime, Marco Polo, I don't know, Google Meets. But why can't it be lunchtime or 3 p.m. or in the evening or whatever it is? That's certainly an option that I think we can consider. And now that we've experienced the use of technology at different times of day, why not do it? Let's keep it up. Another great thing that we've seen with online is the interaction. People love the chat side. people love to be able to use the chat piece, and you're saying, hi, so-and-so, hey, so-and-so, or asking a question or whatever. And I can't imagine, I've only seen this in one place, and that was when you were preaching at a church where we serve in the beginning, when you offered the chance for people to text their questions in, and some did it. And at the end, David would answer questions. And I thought that was really great because we all have questions, and we had a few people with some mental issues, or that maybe had not been to church, or maybe some of both, that would just blurt things out. But, in a worship setting, that's not quite as appropriate, quite as normal. In a Bible study setting or a devotion setting, that's different. But online, you're able to do that, asking questions. And you could have somebody in the side watching the chat and asking the question aloud or whatever. But that's one of the beauties to doing your worship service or your devotion or your small group or whatever online too, because you can ask questions and you can interact.
Yeah, and you know that I agree. I think that interacting with the preacher helps. It's just simply more effective. It's just more effective. Sitting down and hearing a talk or a lecture for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour is not as effective as a shorter reflection from the text, but with questions from the people, because that means they're paying attention. They're going to remember more. I just think it's better. I just... Not maybe every single time. It should be Q&A at a funeral, perhaps. But I'm saying that I think having that option is a good thing. I think
choices. One of the things we talked about, too, is having the choice of what time of day you want to do your service. I know my parents, are 73 and 83, and they're not, obviously, their church is not meeting, but it's a very small, older church. And my mom's actually doing Sunday school via Zoom with her people, but they're doing it at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And my question was, why can't there be a Sunday school or a worship, but not a worship, well, whatever. Why can't there be a Sunday school or worship or whatever in the afternoon or at a more convenient time? Why not Saturday night? I mean, some churches would never do that, but that is an option, and it is a thought to have options. People like that, in particular our generations and the generations after us love choice.
Well, of course, it started in the morning because people wanted to work.
Right.
That's it. It's just before the day. I mean, all the way back to the earliest church, as far as we can tell, they seem to have, Justin Martyr and some others seems to suggest that they did meet on the Sunday morning, but their Sunday morning in the Roman time was our Monday morning. So they met early. Not everyone did. We know this from the Corinthians, because some people got off of work and there was no more communion bread and wine because the rich people had already done it. So the workers got off work. The point is, it was scheduled around work. And since we already have Sunday off because of a long tradition now that Sunday is off because it's, supposed Christian Sabbath, Shabbat, which it is not. The point is, we have 2 days off. And so we don't have to meet Sunday morning. We don't have to. And you can say, well, it revolves around Jesus raised from the dead in the early tomb. That's fine, but that's not when people did it. They didn't. I mean, it's because it's about the work schedule. The biggest pushback I can see is, which I'm all for doing it later. I mean, doing the crack of dawn early. I know the number one response is going to be, I like having it done so I can get on with my day. Sure. So it's not like work. It's, I've got kids to get ready for school, and I've got other things I just simply want to do with my day, and it's more important than it is.
One more thing that we've talked about is the idea that when people are tracking their attendance, some of them are saying, wow, our attendance is huge, it's booming. And it could be because someone was flipping through Facebook Live and they were on there for 2 seconds and then they got off and somebody's there counting or something, however they're doing that. But options, again, are important. And so, for example, on Easter Sunday, we did our small group. We watched my brother's sermon because he's a pastor. I flipped to another. I was looking on Facebook and saw a worship service with the music part that looked really cool. So watched that for a little bit, went to something else, So there are options here. And so people have seen now where they've been going to their same church for however many years and doing their worship a certain way. Now they've seen, there are other ways to do it. And that's really interesting. I just wonder how that's going to impact worship services when we return. I don't know that I would be happy going into a service that has, and I won't say specifically what I like, but I don't know that I'd be happy going into a service that has X, Y, and Z when I've seen that this is the option. What if I could just watch my worship segment, by worship I mean the music segment, online and just show up late for the service and get the sermon or whatever? There are options there. So I thought that was kind of funny. When we were talking about doing worship live or recorded, you mentioned that just a few minutes ago. I've kind of been doing some research. I pay attention to it, and David and I both do since we work in churches or work with churches. the idea of doing a live service versus doing a pre-recorded service. I've noticed a lot of mainline churches are doing pre-recorded services because they're including Eucharist or communion. They're wearing their clothing. What's the special clothing called? Wearing vestments and things like that because that's how they do it in their churches, certain prayers, whatever. There are other churches who are doing live recordings, and guess which one people prefer in my my data of asking people. Guess which one?
Live.
They prefer live. Absolutely, they prefer live. So that's something to think about. We're used to, or the church maybe is used to, it has to be done like this. We say it like this, then we do this, and this is how this works and whatever. And again, when we get back to when we go to a church building again, it doesn't have to be what it always has been. I know that might be heresy to some mainline churches and things like that, but we want to be able to meet the needs of the people. And if it doesn't meet the needs of the people, I would say, and Jesus did, change things up to meet the needs of the people, to spread the gospel, to increase the kingdom. And so that's something certainly to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that reminds me of all the stuff about what I said earlier about the false self, ideal self, and the real self. To me, it's unnecessary and frustrating and maybe a bit disingenuous when I've seen sermons online when even if they're live, but usually they're not, but if they are live, they're preaching from the pulpit looking out at the pews as if they're full of people there. Mm-hmm. Now, to give the benefit of the doubt, the odds are the pastor's like, well, this feels normal to me. It's hard for me to preach to a camera.
Or that's where they have a camera. You mentioned that too.
Yeah, they might have a camera in the sanctuary. Yeah. But nevertheless, my response is it still seemed disingenuous. There's something about everyone knows that the reason why they're doing it is because the church building is shut down and you can't go there. So to pretend that there are people there feels disingenuous.
I've even seen pictures on the pews. Remember people that put pictures?
It just is. The pastor should be looking right at the camera, talking right at the camera, and assuming that the people on the camera are watching this. And then there's someone over there looking at the comments or something. And the point is, it should be acting as if it really is occurring, not you're eavesdropping on a live service you just simply couldn't attend. I just think you shouldn't do that. I think we should be looking right at the camera and say, I'm so glad you're tuning in right now. I know you're at home. Things are going on. Hey, let's go to the Bible. Here we go. And if the pastor's not used to that, well, then get over it. Or then have two people stand behind the camera and stare at the people. But this, I don't know. That's not real. And my hope and prayer is that pastors not only will do that and then keep doing it. That's why when I preach, I don't stand behind a podium and read a manuscript. I find that to be overwhelmingly boring. I don't want to watch someone read to me a lecture they wrote.
And people often comment to you, you don't use notes. And they like that because you feel like they're able to see you and know you. And
that's sweet. And of course, I don't do it in the least bit to be impressive. I do it because I want the speaker, a Bible teacher, to look at me. I don't want to be preached at. I want them to look at me in dialogue. And if the audience doesn't seem to grasp it, I watch their faces. If they're furrowing their brow, I pause and repeat it a different way. Or if they don't laugh, clearly they didn't understand my humor. They didn't hear it. That's just a joke. See, even now, as usual.
A couple of the things that have been...
So the point is, I hope they do that. I hope that people will start looking at the camera. Yeah.
A couple of things that I've seen recently on Facebook Live as I'm flipping through churches that I've worked with and things like that have been really meaningful and special, even in their mainline churches. One was an Episcopalian priest who was sitting outside in a lawn chair or whatever by a fire. And he was doing the Compline prayer, which is the evening prayer, and leading through that service. But he was sitting there, in normal clothes and whatever. And I thought, that's really awesome. I love that. Mm-hmm. Another was a Presbyterian pastor who was speaking to his people from his couch. And there's something to say about getting to know people. I know when we're serving in a church, we like to have people over and have them in our home and get to know us for real. David's shaking his head no, but he does. No. And so people doing that, getting to know your pastor or your children's pastor or your whatever in real life, again, that real self is super important. And that's when they'll come to you when they're having trouble. They'll go, because you're real. That
real self is threatening. It's threatening for pastors and preachers and leaders who have not accepted the real self. Mm-hmm. There are many, many, many pastors of various kinds who hide behind the false self, and they don't want you to really know them. And they don't want that. You need to recognize when I walk in the room, and there's a degree of and I think a degree of obfuscation, I think like there's a degree to which pastors should not be fully known by the people because they don't need to know all your business. Know that every single person's business should be behind the pulpit, no matter who they are. They shouldn't everyone stand up and say, "Here's all the things I struggle with. Here's all the things." The only point is that's different from hiding behind a false sense of self, where they're always Mr. or Mrs. Perfect.
Yep. And
when you take that away and they're sitting by a fireplace, or you don't edit it, and they go, "Oh, I'm sorry, my dog barked," or "There's my cat on the keyboard."
Bloopers, whatever.
Yeah, you just keep going on. And why don't you just go on? I think that's a powerful thing.
There's a great article that I read the other day by Ken Brady called 24 more questions the church should ask before people return. And I believe it's a Lifeway article, or it was published by Lifeway, but it is a great article talking about how things that should be considered before the church reopens its doors. And some of them are kind of funny, but they're really things to think about, which could impact the way that things happen.
And we'll finish up on these things. Yeah.
Okay. One was about singing. So one of the things it said was that may be one of the last things that happens. I don't know if that was actually from that article. Actually,
that's right. They're not listening. It doesn't matter.
But the thing was about singing, because think about it. When you sing, saliva could fly, the person in front of you, whatever. So last night I was telling David that, and he started humming. He's like, maybe we all hum. And so we did.
So Music Master time, like, close your mouth. Everybody just hum. Every time it was just a sneeze.
Talk about somebody sneeze, everybody runs out of the room.
Ran and grabbed them and escort them out. Mama, don't let them get me.
And the whole idea of shaking hands, that greeting time, which is super uncomfortable for introverts anyway, during the hymn humming, that may be out for a while. I mean, picture people. Just
do virtual high fives.
Yeah.
Stay in your seat. Look at them, put your hand up. Yeah, that was a good high five.
Passing the offering plate. Lots of people are touching that nasty thing, whether it's an offering plate or a bucket, if you're at a more modern church or whatever.
And that's why a lot of people just have those boxes in the back where you put your money on your way out. I suspect, again, people who, no, you can't do it that way. They're going to start saying, well, we have to. See, the people who resist that stuff for no theological reason whatsoever,
it's just because they grew up doing it.
They just grew up that way. But anyway.
And online giving is always an option. So churches that are not using that right now, this is the time they're actually promoting it because they need the money. People are not there, so they're not necessarily giving as much as they used to. The whole idea of counting attendance. I mean, if you imagine when people get back, well, for now, what kind of attendance are they going to have? That's why they're counting on Facebook Live, I bet. But counting attendance, how is that going to work? Does somebody count if they're on Facebook for a second? I mean, how does that work? But again, the attendance is a metric to see successful, whatever it is we're measuring. But just thinking of other metrics, maybe it is that whole piece about discipleship. How was your discipleship before? Let's measure it now. Let's check it in 3 months. That sort of thing would be really interesting to see. Some churches are still doing the holding hands thing at the last song or whatever. I know I've been in one church that I worked with that still did that. And as a visitor, I felt quite uncomfortable. A few people that were there mentioned that they were quite uncomfortable, but that's just what they did to kind of show unity. My parents' church does that still. I don't remember the song, but holding hands, I'm guessing those kinds of things are going to go out. But those are things that should have already been considered because it's not comfortable for a visitor. Introverts don't like it. We have people who don't like to touch. And there are things that we should have already considered, and hopefully some people have, that haven't been, but now they have to be considered. So just thinking about that. The way communion is offered. A lot of churches do intinction, where you dip the bread inside the wine or the grape juice. A lot of churches do you go up and you get the piece of bread and you drink out of the same, what's the mug called? What's the cup called? The same cup. That is probably not going to happen.
What's the mug called? Big mug? Well, not to mention the typical Protestant pass around the plate and you have a piece of bread, fake styrofoam in it. And dig your finger and then grab pieces.
And the kids look for the biggest one, so they're touching it all before they pick their nose. Yeah,
that's got to be different.
Coffee stations. A lot of churches have spent a lot of money building a coffee station, coffee bar, whatever. Serve yourself. I know one of our favorite stores, Wawa, has stopped where you can go get your drink. You can't get your fountain drink because it's germy. And so how in the world is that going to work? We're going to have to rethink that. Those cool churches that have coffee bars.
It's going to be automated. Hello, what can I get for you?
Just go think about it and it'll happen. David talked about having hand sanitizer everywhere, but really, I mean that's something. Some churches add Kleenex boxes to each pew. Yeah, now it's going to be like hand sanitizer everywhere. When you come into the door and the usher greets you, it's not going to be a handshake or, the hugging thing. This is just things to think about that will not be, at least for some time. Some people might break the rules and do it anyway, but.
I've always wanted to have baptisms in Purell. Give them like goggles. Because the symbolism alone. But now they're going to have to.
Then they're really going to be clean.
Is there theology in being rebaptized? And
there is, yeah.
Purell?
One of the concerns was really baptism. How's that going to work? Make sure it's well chlorinated, I guess, in the baptismal pool.
But communion for a lot of people, you keep seeing mainline churches. If you don't know the mainline church is typically a description for the higher church traditions that are not free church. What that means is these are churches that have some kind of hierarchy structure. So it would involve churches like Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, Anglican, Episcopalian, of course. Those kind of churches that have a hierarchy structure. They have district superintendents, or they have bishops, people above them. And those more mainstream churches, which are overwhelmingly dying out as far as population numbers go, because most mainline traditions just don't care much at all about evangelism. They care about being in the church, so they're literally dying off unless you're born into it. Most people do not convert to Episcopalianism and so forth. But nevertheless, these higher church mainline traditions, not to mention, of course, Roman Catholicism, I will mention particularly, Roman Catholics in particular and Orthodox, that you have to participate in the Mass or communion in person. That's why it's effective for you. That's why it's very important for Roman Catholics to say you must go to Mass. You must be there in the presence where the priest breaks the bread and so forth. I disagree with that theology. I think it's not biblical, but I understand the point they're making. But it creates huge problems for that. And that's why even when the Pope has to do virtual Mass online, paint St. Peter's Basilica, and there, of course, it creates theological conundrums that most free church non-denominationals and Baptist and Mennonites, some other places, they don't have to struggle with that much at all because they don't have to be in presence. It's a symbol. You're participating with what Christ has done, but it's more of a symbol than it is. You're not reenacting the death of Jesus and re-crucifying him over and over and over, as Roman Catholics believe. So there are things they're going to have to rethink through. Either they're going to say, well, now it doesn't matter. Well, now it doesn't matter. That goes against thousands of years of couple thousand years of belief. If it does matter, you're in deep trouble. You're going to have to violate government orders, or it means people really could die and go to hell because they didn't experience Mass for a while or communion for a while. But these kind of issues,
according to that belief.
According to that belief, that's right. I don't believe that at all. But anyway, those are thoughts going to go.
Yeah, I talked to some of my Episcopalian friends the other day about that because I've seen a few that I know that are Episcopalian priests that are, they're giving the Eucharist. They're doing it on their recording or whatever. And I said, how does that work for people at home? They're not taking their communion, their Eucharist. And I was told there's some discussion there about whether or not people can receive what they call the grace of the Eucharist, even though they're not participating, just by seeing it or by desiring it. So there's discussion right now with the bishops and things like that about how that works and what does that look like and things like that. So it's an interesting time in the church and in the world.
It's called a grace because the sacrament. Sacramentum in Latin means this mystery, but the point is, it's a way of participating in God's grace, and there are multiple ways of experiencing that. And one is the sacrament of communion, sacrament of baptism, sacrament. Roman Catholic, you got 7: sacrament of marriage, sacrament whatever. The Protestant reformers said no, they're not sacraments. There's only 2 ways. The ordinance is. An ordinance is a different Latin word for commandment, so that is you're commanded to do it. Doesn't mean you're receiving the grace of God. You receive the grace of God only through the death and resurrection of Jesus and his Holy Spirit. But yeah, if you have if you have a sacramental view of anything that occurs in the church, this distant stuff becomes highly problematic, more than it is for people who do not. And so we'll pray for our sacramental brothers and sisters to hopefully they can process all this and come to the truth that it doesn't matter.
Teasing.
I hope and pray that, let's see, that's a big problem. It'll be a bigger problem for them rather than us people. Thank you, honey. You're such a fantastic, wonderful co-host.
Oh, thanks, babe.
And your nails look beautiful.
Thank you.
Man. And even doing your own hair during this virus time. It's just hard for females.
It is.
Most of them, I guess. I'm glad you identify as a female, and you are.
I am.
You do a great job at doing it. And at the time of this recording, my wife just turned 43 years old. I don't know if I could say it or not.
Yep, that's fine. I don't care.
I bought her a very nice deluxe walker that can be used in this time of crisis. It has a CB radio antenna.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's amazing.
Pink.
It's pink. Love the pink. Came with a bracelet and a Fitbit. You can track your... I haven't bought the tennis balls yet to open up the tennis ball, spill in the back. Whichever physical therapist says do not do. But they put on the bottom,
so it doesn't make a scratchy sound.
So they can slide.
Oh,
So they don't have to
slide.
ka-kunk, so they can slide across the floor.
I thought it was so it would make a noise.
Well, that too, but... Well, the conversation isn't finished. You can always reach out to me on social media. Are you on Facebook? I am too. At Glimpse of the Kingdom. Glimpse of the Kingdom on Facebook. Be sure to like it and you can see updates there. Also, if you're on Twitter, check me out at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, or at Glimpse the King, at Glimpse the King. And I try my best to respond to comments and questions on there as quickly as I can. If you want more, there are many more resources on the podcast and my blog. Go to my website, davidpendergrass.com, and you can see a full list of the podcast, and my blog is available for free. Are you active in a church right now? I'd be happy to come out to your church and do all kinds of classes and workshops there. Check out davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com for more information. And may God in His great grace give you even just a glimpse of His kingdom this week. See you next time.